So I want to get started and introduce you to the wonderful Robyn and Ellie from Care of Studios, and then we can get started. So Care of Studios is a conservation practice based in Melbourne, founded by Robyn and Eleanor Vallier. They aim to provide artist, value and people-centred conservation of the modern and contemporary art that is sustainable, inclusive and collaborative. Robyn and Eleanor are both interdisciplinary conservators and have experience working with a wide variety of collections, including from community organisations, museums, galleries and private clients. Collectively, they have over 20 years' experience working locally, nationally and internationally within the areas of design, fine art, architecture, galleries, museums and community engagement. So they will be presenting to us the second Preserve Your Story workshop next month, which will look at how to conserve slides and digital files. So over to you, Robyn and Ellie, take it away.
Thank you, Danny, and thanks for the lovely introduction. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first session of Preserve Your Story workshop series for the Women's Art Register. So my name is Robyn Ho, and I'm an art conservator and past volunteer at Vallier. So first off, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we are speaking to you today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We acknowledge the sovereignty has never been ceded and it always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
And hi everyone, my name is Eleanor Vallier. I'm also a conservator and past volunteer at Vallier. And together, as Caroline mentioned, we run a conservation studio based in Collingwood. So our studio focuses on the care and treatment of a range of artworks and objects, and we have a keen interest in modern and contemporary art. So in today's webinar, we will discuss just a few simple techniques for how you can care for your paper-based objects and photographs at home. So we're going to start with a short lecture and then go into a demonstration. And then the second half of the session will be a Q&A where we can answer any specific questions that anybody has or sort of expand on any of the concepts that we introduce in our presentation. So if you do have any questions while we're presenting, if you want to pop them in the chat, and then Caroline and Danny will be able to sort of streamline those for the Q&A afterwards. But I think we will get started. So by the end of this session, we hope that we can provide you with a better understanding of how to care for your paper-based objects and photographs. Okay, let's get into it. All right, slide one. So paper materials make up a large portion of our cultural heritage and take many forms: books, artworks, posters, maps, documents, postage stamps and photographs. Paper itself is a relatively fragile material. However, there are a lot of ways that you can care for it to ensure its longevity and really get the best out of its lifespan. So in this workshop, we're going to try to give you a bit of an overview of, first of all, how paper and photographic prints are made, because it's really important to have an understanding of, how these things are made in order to care for them. What are the common types of deterioration that you will see on your paper objects? What are the best practice and best ways to store and display paper and photographs? What are some of the simple preservation techniques that you can do to care for these objects? And then we've got a few useful resources where you can find further reading and some videos and more things to help you in this area. Okay.
Oh, our keyboard is not working. Sorry, bear with us. So we decided to focus the webinar on both paper and photographic prints, as both involve paper substrates and therefore share some common conservation approaches. However, photographs in particular have additional needs as they have a more kind of complex construction. That's why photographic conservation is often a specialised field. So there are actual conservators who are focused particularly on photographs and even types of subsets of photographs. So the fundamental process of, so I'll just go through, sorry, I'll just go back. But first off, we'll just do an overview of how paper is made and what it's made of. So the fundamental process of paper making hasn't really changed since it was first produced in China around 200 BC. However, modern paper making has introduced kind of chemical and mechanical processes to produce paper kind of on an industrial scale. So paper is made from cellulose fibers. Cellulose fibers are extracted from a variety of plants such as cotton, flax, hemp, mulberry, grasses and trees and various things. The type of plants that paper is made from can affect the quality of the paper and how it will age. So plant fibers naturally have varying proportions of cellulose and other fibrous materials such as hemicellulose and lignin. So the most permanent papers are the ones derived with fibers with a very high cellulose content. So the higher cellulose content, the better paper it is. So all paper until the 19th century was handmade, primarily from cotton and linen rags and hemp, which produced papers of great strength and permanence. So you'll see prints that are from that period that you are surprised that it can survive because it is made of such good quality materials. And then you'll see papers that were maybe produced 10 years ago that are falling apart. So it's this, the quality of the fiber really influences how it will degrade. So as, I guess as modern kind of technology kind of developed better ways or like more increased production of paper, the need for paper increased. The kind of raw materials, they were trying to use raw materials like ground wood to kind of make more paper, and this ground wood kind of results in a weaker and less permanent paper due to the high presence of lignin in the ground wood pulp. So you'll find these kind of lower quality papers. You'll see it in newspapers is a really prime example. So you might have noticed that newspapers often turn yellow over time. And that is because of the high lignin content in the paper. So over time, lignin can degrade and give off acids, which causes the cellulose in the paper to degrade more quickly. So therefore, the lignin content of your paper can affect how vulnerable your paper objects are to degradation.
Okay, so paper is broadly manufactured using 3 steps. So first of all, the cellulose fibers are extracted and converted to pulp by boiling, washing and beating. Pulp is then combined with water and laid into a mold. And then that molded pulp is flattened, dried and cut into sheets and rolls. So besides the fibers and water, paper can often include additional products to impart certain properties, such as fillers or loadings, which produce a smoother and whiter surface. So kaolin, talc, calcium carbonate, and titanium dioxide. So, you know, think of like a printing paper, which is really smooth and glossy and white. Surface coatings, which alter the visual characteristics, so starches and various minerals, which sort of change how the paper will absorb and react to things applied to it. And then sizing is the one to reduce the absorbency of the paper. So that's also starch and then gelatins as well, which we will see in photographs. So most papers also contain impurities and unwanted chemicals, such as acids, which limit their lifespan. So these are related to the inherent lignin content of the fiber. So as Robyn just said, you know, newspapers yellowing over time because of their high lignin content, they also are quite acidic, and that yellowing is associated with the acid. So to overcome this problem with acids, there are now papers and paper-based products being produced which are free of acids and other impurities. So these are archival quality papers and products, and they're made from various fibers, including cotton and specially treated wood pulp. So many archival papers and boards also contain an alkaline buffer to help protect them from acidity inherent in them and materials around them.
However, paper objects commonly do not just consist of just paper, but also have images or text. So when you're thinking about caring for paper objects, you also need to consider the degradation of any applied mediums, such as watercolours, inks, gouache, etc. And this kind of leads us nicely into photographs. So this slide just kind of goes on about how photographs are kind of structured. So broadly, photography kind of describes an image that is captured by the use of light. So they can be reproduced and printed on a carrier or substrate. And there's quite a wide variety, such as plastic, glass, metal, and paper. So slides or transparencies or negatives also get lumped in with photography. But today, I guess that's just way too big to cover today. So we'll primarily kind of focus on, I guess, what colloquially you'll consider what a photograph is. So photographic prints on paper. So prints consist of papers that are coated with silver salts or other metals or coloured dyes that react to light to create the image. So we can say that generally photographic prints have a paper substrate with kind of varying layers on top. So there are kind of 4 basic structures. You've got the kind of older technology, so it's the single layer structure where the kind of light sensitive material is within the paper. So that's like salted paper prints, cyanotypes, planitypes. So that early 19th century technology. There's the 2-layer structure. So that's where light sensitive materials in the upper emulsion layer. And that's kind of in album prints and carbon prints, again, from like the mid-19th century onwards. Then there's the 3-layer structure, and that's similar to the 2-layer structure, except there's an added burrata, I think that's how you say it, layer between the paper and the emulsion layer, and that provides a kind of smooth white surface. So what that does is smooths out the paper fibres behind the image, so it creates a really crisp image. So that can be found as, say, gelatin and collodion printing out papers of the late 19th century onwards. And then there's, I guess, the modern resin-coated paper, and that's from the 1970s onwards. And that paper is coated with polyethylene and a light-sensitive gelatin emulsion or coloured dye layer on top. So that's like, I guess, a lot of the photo albums you might have from I don't know, from like the old 1-hour photo places that would use a resin-coated paper. So paper objects and photographs need to be considered as composite objects of varying complexity. So in the case of flat paper materials, this may be some sort of applied media such as ink or watercolour, or in the more complex kind of case of photographs, its image consists of lots of laminated layers on paper. So when you're thinking about these objects, you've got to think about how it's kind of structured and what is the most kind of vulnerable part of that object.
Now we'll move into some degradation types. So paper, as I'm sure you're all aware, is particularly vulnerable to physical damage. But because it is an organic material, it's also susceptible to damage caused by chemical deterioration. So from pollutants, light, moisture, humidity, and pests. Matte and porous surfaces like paper can hold dirt and dust, which is often acidic and can attract moisture and bugs to it. This in turn can then cause chemical and physical changes. Physical forces can result in tears and losses, dents and punctures, creases and folds, and abrasion and the thinning of paper. Pollutants from the air or other materials can subject the paper to acids. These acids can also be found in poor quality framing materials like mount board or sticky tape that are in direct contact with the paper object. And this can result in embrittlement of the paper, acid burn or darkening, and yellowing as well. And then light as well can produce chemical changes such as fading and embrittlement of the paper or media. And incorrect relative humidity and exposure to moisture more on the upper end of the spectrum. So if you're in a very humid environment, that can also result in cockling or buckling to the paper, and tide lines and staining if there's any direct contact with water to the paper. And this is where there is a good source of water and food, like in many of these examples, that's where biological attacks can be attracted to your paper. So that can result in insect attacks, which produce losses and weaken the structure of the paper. It can be foxing, which are reddish brown dotted stains, which are caused by the metal particles in the paper or impurities being attacked by microorganisms. Fly specks and frass, which are the excretions of insects on the paper. They can cause more chemical degradation as they are quite acidic themselves. And then mold, of course, which is another biological attack.
And as well as the kind of damage that the paper substrate can be subjected to, the image and the text media are vulnerable to degradation and damage or loss. So here are some kind of examples in this slide of some degradation of the media. So physical forces can cause abrasion, smudges, loss of media, particularly if it's like powdery, so chalk or pastel or charcoal. Apologies, that's weird. I don't know what that is. Oh, sorry, just having a technical issue.
That's very weird.
That is
Maybe
weird.
just extra. Right at the top. Yeah, click that. Very weird.
Is this affecting people at the moment?
No, they're not seeing it.
Okay. So you can only see the slide?
We can see slide number 2 comment time. Oh my God! Sorry.
Can you see my like an email window on the right-hand side at all?
No, I can just see the full screen. And
okay, great, wonderful.
Is that working? It's right for you?
It's done some weird stuff on our side, but anyway, as long as it looks fine on your side. But okay, so I'll just continue. So yeah, we were talking about the media and the degradation of that. So again, yeah, abrasion can cause smudges, etc. on fireable media. Light can cause fading of pigments, particularly organic pigments such as matters or lakes. So that's kind of often in watercolours, is quite susceptible to fading. And thicker paints like gouache can be affected by incorrect relative humidity, temperature or light, which can cause delamination, cracking, flaking and loss. So, and even the media itself can kind of contribute to chemical degradation of a paper object. So that, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but this little picture here shows iron gall ink on paper, which has caused an acidic kind of situation on the paper and has eaten away at the paper. So iron gall ink is kind of found on, was kind of used as a permanent ink in the later 20th century. And it's kind of like one of the kind of commonly used synthetic pigment. So sometimes, yeah, it can cause, the actual media itself can cause degradation, and that's kind of an inherent vice of the objects. Okay, let's see if this will work. There we go.
So photos get their own special class of degradation because, as we discussed, they have a more complex structure, but they do suffer from the same physical and chemical damages that paper is vulnerable to. So they, as well as the paper substrate being vulnerable in the ways we've just listed, there's also the vulnerability of the image layers, which have all sorts of different media types there. So the gelatin and emulsion layers are very absorbent, and the reactive silver or any colored dyes that make up the image can undergo their own special chemical changes. So some of the common degradation forces you may see in photographs are physical forces, so tears, creases, and losses. Now, water is something that is very damaging to photos. So even a small amount of water will cause softening or the dissolution of the gelatin layer, if there is one, creating a sticky surface. So exposure to water can cause sticking of the emulsion to other materials it may be in contact with. So that could be the glass in the frame, the backs of other photographs, or the sort of pages in a photo book. There can be staining and tide lines, and in any dirt that's on the surface may become embedded into that softened gelatin layer. Mold is another thing that's the gelatin is quite susceptible to. So high humidity can make the gelatin layers more permeable, which then makes the image layer more vulnerable to deterioration. If there's silver present, that can oxidize, which produces silver ions, which are highly reactive and able to migrate and disperse themselves through the gelatin emulsion, ultimately resulting in a total loss of silver. This is due to exposure to the strong oxidizing agents, can be peroxide bleaches from poor quality paper boxes, or sulfur dioxide from air pollution if there is moisture present in that environment. So 3 major things can happen to photos: sulfiding, where the silver turns to sulfides, and that results in brown or yellow staining and fading of the image. Silver mirroring, which is where the silver ions can migrate to the surface of the gelatin and combine with the other silver ions, which then form a layer of visible metallic silver. So if you've ever seen that, it kind of looks like a silver sheen on the surface of the photo. And then there's the formation of colloidal silver, which appears as an orange-coloured tint or patches in the image. And this is particularly prevalent in resin-coated papers. Exposure to visible light and UV can discolor and weaken paper and begin the processes of photochemical degradation. And this results in the fading of photographic dyes, discoloration and color shifts, yellowing, and weakening of coatings, which cause them to be brittle and crack. So that emulsion layer can crack as well.
So this leads us on to the ideal storage and display conditions. So the ideal environmental conditions to store paper and photographs are listed in this slide. Paper is an organic material, and therefore it's particularly vulnerable to humidity, temperature, and light. Photographic prints are even more vulnerable, and in institutions are often stored separately in lower temperatures and relative humidity conditions. So even put in the fridge and in specialist kind of cold storage. In museums, objects are displayed in low lighting conditions, and the amount of time they are subjected to light is closely monitored. So objects are put on display and then cycled back into dark storage, so the exposure can be limited. So museum lighting is also fitted with UV filters to prevent UV exposure. However, in a non-museum setting, these conditions are really difficult to achieve. Therefore, the aim is to provide a stable condition where it's stable as possible. So avoid extreme fluctuations where you can. So the aim is to provide a cool, dark, dry, and stable spot storage space with stable humidity and temperature. So some key kind of pointers is to avoid using an attic or basement space as a storage area. Use a storage location in the center of your building, as these areas can experience less fluctuations in temperature. So, don't put it in a cupboard in the center of your house, maybe not on an external wall, or if it's in an external or like a room that has an external wall, maybe put it in a cabinet against a wall that's an internal wall. Avoid strong light sources and direct sunlight. Keep material away from heat sources, so away from fireplaces and hydronic heating panels and that kind of stuff. Avoid contact with any like potentially damp locations such as bathrooms, kitchens, laundries, and external walls, and keep storage areas off the ground, clean and ventilated to reduce the risk of pests and mold. So, you know, if you have a flood or something, it's not on the ground, it's going to get wet. So off the ground, just in case it floods, but also keeps the air flow underneath. Also, it's kind of good to sort through your paper and photographic collections and group them according to their media and type. This will help you choose storage environments that are kind of more nuanced and suit each particular type of object or class of object. But if you have kind of mixed types, you might have to find a compromise and store objects in kind of average conditions that broadly suit most objects in your collection. And then maybe pick out the most kind of significant and vulnerable objects and store them separately, and figure out a specialist kind of storage solution for your most precious things.
Okay, so as Robyn said, it is recommended that you store paper in these best conditions, but there are some other ways that you can sort of help the longevity and best storage conditions for your objects. So archival enclosures, or keeping them mounted and framed if you want to display them. So storage enclosures are things like boxes, folders and sleeves that aid in the protection, organisation and identification of common items. Their primary function is shielding those items from dust and physical damage. While providing protective enclosures is a desirable aspect of preservation practice, improving the overall storage climate is more effective, you know, if you need to sort of split hairs about what you're going to do. But the key approach to storage is make sure objects are not in direct contact with each other, so that will prevent abrasion and sticking if there are any climatic effects, and keeping them away from other degrading materials. So it's best to interleave objects with an archival tissue paper, or put each individual item in their own paper envelope, folder or plastic sleeve in a binder. Paper clips, adhesives and sticky tapes should not and never be used or have any direct contact with the objects, even if they say they're archival quality. So, if you were putting it in a paper folder and you wanted to use some adhesive for a label or paper clips, just make sure that's not in direct contact with the object itself, but the external wrapper that you're using. And then provide a buffer from the environment and physical damage by using some sort of enclosure, so they're not just out in the open. And this can be achieved by storing binders or folders either vertically in flip-top archival boxes or flat in shallow print boxes. And when using boxes, it's important to make sure you have enough space around the edges of the interior so that you can actually fit your fingers into the box to pick them up without scrunching the edges there. If you do have any old magnetic photo albums, it's best to rehouse them in new archival binders with mylar photo corners. That's because magnetic photo albums contain adhesives which oxidize and degrade your photos over time. So unfortunately, a lot of the older albums might be made with plastics that will acidify and oxidize, and then speed up the degradation of your photos. So there are a number of really good companies out there that are providing archival quality, acid-free protection and storage enclosures. Now with photographs, you can sort of loosely wrap them individually. You can wrap loose photographs individually, or a few photos at a time interleaved with paper in a 4-flap wrapper, which you can see down in the middle there. And that doesn't contain any adhesives or anything. It's just the paper, and they kind of slot in together, which is really good. some good online tutorials out there for making those, and also making Mylar photo corners, which is the best thing to sort of hold them in place on a page. And yeah, as I said, enclosures can be made or bought from specialty archival suppliers. So Archival Survival here in Melbourne have a really great range of conservation grade storage solutions for all paper-based materials.
So,
yeah, get in.
No, that's different. So when you're thinking about making your enclosures or displaying your objects or getting them framed, whatever material that's against your object needs to be kind of an archival quality. So in this slide, we kind of go into about what materials are really advised to use for storage. So the key things are cardboard and paper that are archival quality and acid free. They're pure cellulose and lignin free. So again, anti-lignin, yes, cellulose. And then buffered for paper objects and non-buffered for photographs. And then particularly for photographs, there's a certain standard called the photographic activity test, the PAT standard. So if you've got a material that has passed those standards, and then this link down below will show you what some materials that have passed that. That's from the National Archives. And there's also, you can use some plastics, and they're in like plastic sleeves or boxes and enclosures. So normally they're things that have no vinyl, so no PVC and no sulfur. So those are your real nasties that kind of turn into acids. So you want things that are more stable, like polyester, polypropylene, and polyethylene. So directly onto an object, maybe polyester like Mylar or Milanex, and then polyethylene and polypropylene are what you would find in, say, a box or a folder. So again, if you are unsure and you want to make your own kind of enclosures, it's best, I guess, to kind of look online and also maybe ask the conservator, or take the kind of guesswork out and buy these. You can buy a lot of these things from, say, Archival Survival and various other archival shops.
So as well as storage, there's obviously display, which is another way that you can protect your items. So when putting things on display, it's recommended that your significant objects are framed or mounted on boards with good conservation principles. So that means using archival quality materials like acid-free mat boards, and sometimes even UV filtering glazing, if you know that some of your media types are particularly susceptible to fading or UV damage, and then sealing all of the edges of your sort of framing display package with tape to protect the object from dust, moisture, and light. It is recommended that whatever method of presentation that you're using to display your works is reversible and can be removed without damaging the object. So for example, avoid dry mounting paper objects, as the adhesive and backing boards are really difficult to remove, really time consuming. We can do it, but you know, in the sort of paper conservation side of our studio, we see a lot of old certificates or posters of, you know, just things people value that have been dry mounted and they've yellowed over time because the material that they're mounted onto has oxidized. So they're actually causing a lot of damage to that object and are really difficult to remove. So it's best to hinge mount any paper objects using Japanese tissue paper and starch paste. This is standard for conservation grade framing, and it's not that difficult really to do with a bit of instruction. So damage can occur when objects are improperly handled. So it's important to have clean, dry hands or wear nitrile gloves when handling paper-based material, because even if you can't see it, imagine like with the naked eye, sort of oils and fats that are on your fingers can impart onto the paper surface. So when handling and transporting any unframed artworks and documents, you can use a sort of thick support paper underneath, or put it in the side of folder to carry it around. And when carrying a framed work, it's best to hold by both sides of the frame, not the top edge. It can be vulnerable and break. And if a valuable or fragile item is going to be handled frequently for educational purposes or something, consider creating a copy or a duplicate, which can be handled, and then you've got the original safe elsewhere, and that will be ensuring its preservation.
So there's some kind of simple things you can do to maintain your paper-based objects. So some key things to do is to regularly monitor and check the condition of your objects. Housekeeping is really important, so keep areas clean, inspect areas regularly for mold or insect activity. Cleaning materials such as chlorine, like bleaches, ammonia, insecticides, fungicides shouldn't be used anywhere near your collections. They have really active chemicals that kind of affect photographs and all the kind of emulsion layers. Simple dry cleaning techniques can help maintain objects, so dusting objects with a hake brush, sponges, erasers. So we'll go through a few of those techniques in our demonstration later, and obviously contact a conservator for advice. So, and key thing is don't apply any liquids, water, solvents or adhesives onto your objects. So if you remember from before, paper is made using water and it just loves water. And so it just wants to go back to that state of, being a fiber. So as soon as you put water, it starts doing its thing, and once it buckles and it stains. So key is to keep it really dry, whatever you do. But yes, we'll go through a couple of techniques that will help keep things dust-free. And then we'll just kind of, here are some resources. So again, we'll give every participant a copy of these slides with all our kind of extra information. So you can go through these kind of links at your leisure. But here are some videos as well about making enclosures, about dry cleaning, vacuum cleaning, making the full flat wrapper, things like that. Here are some kind of conservation suppliers as well. So, and I guess we'll go through our presentation, our demonstration. And so bear with us as we switch cameras.
Okay, so. Okay, so start video. Here we go. All right, so we've just got a few items here which we'll go through. The three things that I guess we want you to take away from this demonstration are what is your item made of? How does it or is it deteriorating? And what can I do to help preserve it in the long time? So first off, we just have a few objects here which might be some of the materials that you have around your house. So here we've got a print. I'm not sure what sort of print it is, but it's quite obvious. It's a print. It's got some color in there, which might be applied in the printing process, or it could be applied afterwards. Over here we have a watercolor. So that obviously is very susceptible to water, and there's no real border around that, so have to be careful about that as well. And then we have a photograph here, so I'll just go through them briefly. So with our photograph, you can see it's a bit bowed and buckled. Now it is loose at the moment, but at the back you can see there's a bit of a glue stick swirl and some paper remnants where it was once housed in a photo book. Now our watercolor, it's got a bit of that dark staining and acid burn around the edges where it was also probably housed with some non-archival tape. And then at the back we've got, this is sort of a backing removal in practice. Now it's, as you can see, it's really bonded to this like acidic paper, so it's a really labor intense process to get this off safely. So best to avoid any of that. And then our print here also has a bit of acid burn on the edges where there was once an adhesive, and it's got a bit of surface dust and grime there. So yeah, with our media types, as Robyn said, we just don't want to introduce any water to any of these, but we will show you some dry cleaning techniques that you can go through.
Sure. So we've kind of, Elle's gone through, I guess, what the kind of inherent vulnerabilities of the original media is. So first off, we might just focus on this print and show you some dry cleaning kind of techniques using these kind of tools. So first off, we'll go over the handling. So we want to remove this print, this photograph and this watercolor. So again, get a thick piece of cardboard that gives it support, and then put things on a support before you, apologies, should be two-handed, but anyway. So then it's on a board, so then you can move it away. So we'll just go through a couple of tools for dry cleaning. So we have a parquet brush. This can be bought at a lot of art stores, and it's a soft brush, and basically you use it to dust the surface. So you dust it like this, and basically what we would say is look at the surface first and try not to brush any vulnerable areas. So at this print there might be, there's some kind of hand applied, maybe watercolor and pigments here. If that was, say, pastel or charcoal or something like that, you don't want to be brushing over it. You want to avoid those areas. So again, just it's a very soft brush. Don't go in too deep. It is about just a gentle brush. And so that's a parquet brush. Then there is the eraser. So again, this is the Staedtler Mars plastic eraser. So we use this particular eraser specifically because it has no vinyl in this eraser. So if you can just very lightly just rub the area and erase it, or you can grate it and then rub the gratings over it very lightly, and that will get rid of any kind of embedded dirt. So you'll see in this print here, there is some pencil here, and there is also on the back some pencil along here. So again, just remember, these kind of inscriptions are important parts of the object and kind of tell the object's history. So you don't want to be erasing them off, just as a reminder. And then there is the smoke sponge. So this is a particularly kind of specialist type of sponge. And what you do is you can rip it like this into smaller pieces. You can cut them into tiny pieces, however you want to do that. But basically you just lightly brush, rub the edge. And again, very light. It's all about successive light passes, not just getting right in there. It's about a gentle. And then hopefully you get something like this, where you get a bit of dirt on, if it would focus, but anyway. But yes, you'll get a bit of dirt on, and that's how you know that you're cleaning it properly or that you're getting something off. Again, don't just look at your paper and make it look bright white, because by that time it's probably abraded to a point. Just look at your sponge and just light successive passes until that's kind of clean. And then there is also then a cosmetic sponge. So you can kind of get them from chemists. And then again, it's a similar thing, is just to rub that on the surface. And then again, you wait until you just do gentle kind of brushing. And again, don't look just at here and that it's, looking bright white. You want to look at your sponge. And again, you kind of get like a bit of a dirt on that as well.
So yes, so the key thing is, again, also is to just look at your object. So you wouldn't be just sponging away. Thing is to look at your vulnerabilities of your media, and say for something like this, you know, this kind of coloured areas might be very vulnerable. So it might be useful just to avoid all the print areas and just do the white margin where there is no design. And then you get a bit of, it's not really visible on the camera, but it is quite dirty. Anyway, so that's just a few little techniques that you can do to clean your objects.
Okay, and now we're going to just do a quick encapsulation to finish off our demonstration. So I'm going to bring our photograph back on our handling paper. So what we're going to do, this is something that you could do for any sort of paper object. What we've got is a mylar sleeve from Archival Survival. So, you know, you can just buy them. This is a pack of 25. You can also just get mylar plastic itself and, we've gone a bit out of focus, and just cut them to whatever shape or size you need. Now, what I've got here is a little custom encapsulation pocket. So I've just got one of these mylar sheets and cut it to the right size for my object. So again, you always want to have a margin around the edge. You don't want it to be really close up. It's quite hard to get in and out that way. But with something like this, we'd be looking at encapsulating it, you know, so that we don't take it out again, but in its pocket, it's much safer to handle because it's got the plastic around it. So what I've done here is I'm not sure if you can see, but used some acid-free double-sided tape and just put that at one side to close off that edge. These two were already closed off. And then what I'll do, just gently put that in, and we want to avoid touching the surface of the photograph while we do this. We get that in, and then once you're happy with your position, you just get this. This is a piece of the double-sided tape that I'd already applied on one edge of that encapsulation. So what I'm going to do is just kind of get one edge and then slowly smooth that down as I pull it off. And then there we go. You can use a bone folder or your fingers or a burnisher. Just sort of smooth that down. And then there we have it, a little encapsulation for a single item. And you can put any labeling or things on the plastic itself rather than putting it on the object. And that is the end of our demonstration. So I'm just going to mute myself.
Okay. Great. So I think we're up to the Q&A portion of today's kind of workshop.
Yeah, so I think probably what we can do now is feel free if you would all prefer to move into gallery mode rather than speaker view. I'd love to bring Caroline in because Caroline sort of kept an eye on the chat for us at the moment. So introducing Caroline Phillips, the Secretary of the Women's Art Register. And I just wanted to know, Caroline, have we got any questions in the chat?
Thanks, Danny. Hi, everyone. And thanks so much, Robyn and Elle. That was so fantastic. It was really, really interesting. So there is a couple of questions and they're all sort of different. So I might just go through now. There's one from Anna and she's asking about yellowing on Chinese paper. I'm not sure what your question is, what to do with it or how to best treat it, where the paper was folded in an original bundle. So yeah, what happens when you've got things that are bundled up together and you might have a fold in there? And I had a similar question where I found an item that had another item stuck on the back because they were bundled together. So perhaps if we can put those questions together.
Okay, well, there's a few kind of things going on. So there's yellowing, there's folding or folded,
yeah,
and things stuck together.
Yeah.
So one, yellowing is a chemical change. So it's kind of hard to fully reverse that. So we can, depending on the type of object it is, there is some sort of kind of bleaching that can be done, but it's really...
Yeah, it's not something that we would advise anybody to try at home, because as in conservation there are, you know, we can sort of do washes or blotter washes or sun bleaching or these sort of really gentle techniques, but they can go wrong very easily. So that would be something we'd probably direct you to discuss with the conservator. And unfortunately some yellowing just can't really be reduced because, as Robyn said, it's a chemical change. So once those fibres have changed to that state, it's really hard to bring them back. And I know a lot of people, especially in the poster industry, will apply like ammonia bleachers to get things bright whiter, and unfortunately that really degrades the paper fibres themselves, and so you might get a good visual result, but you've really damaged the actual structure, physical and chemical structure of that paper.
And I guess with yellowing, it's, you know, there are kind of things you can do, that kind of aesthetic treatments you can do to kind of lighten it up, but again I would consult a conservator. That's very high level chemistry. Folds again require moisture to flatten, so I would consult a conservator.
I mean, something that's just like gently folded, you could try to put under a bit of weight.
Put some like heavy art books on top of it and just let it sit on a table.
But again, you know, making sure that whatever media, or if there is media on the paper, that isn't going to be sort of rubbed or abraded by anything, and you want to make sure you have some sort of inert material like a mylar or you know, an acid-free board underneath it, so you're not directly onto the table as well. But big art books
just put them in time. So I think with a lot of flattening, it's time and pressure. So it's a waiting game, conservation. And then things stuck together, that requires again some that requires a conservator.
I mean, if it's depending on the valuable,
exactly,
like the significance of the item to yourself, and you know, you can sort of see how stuck they are. If they're really stuck, you know, ripping them apart or even being quite ginger and gentle, you can still get that transfer of materials. And
you can get, you know, take a layer off or things like that. So, you know, it depends on the value of your object. So if it's quite a valuable thing, then obviously I would get the conservator, because even conservators can kind of mess that one up too. So and that can be quite difficult because you are kind of working blind in a way. You have two things stuck together and you're just slowly mechanically kind of, you know, and with some trickery with moisture and whatnot, you can ease them off. But again, it requires quite a like a real examination of the original materials. So maybe if they're photographs, or you know, if they're resin coated photographs, for example, maybe there are kind of distinct layers. It really depends on, I guess, the original material and then how degraded and smooshed they are. But
like, for example, we had some pieces come in that were sort of screen prints on paper that were in plastic folders, and the paint hadn't been quite dry, I think, when they went in, so they had stuck to that plastic folder, and we were able to get quite a good result with like a bit of heat. And then but again, it was, you know, something that was quite specialized, and unfortunately you're not always able to save all media,
everything. So we did pretty well saving it all, but we were lucky in that certain pigments were more, I guess, had cured more than say other colors, and so certain colors we noticed had completely bonded to that plastic, rather than we were lucky with some colors which had a little bit of, it cured a little bit more, so there was a bit more of a distinct layer. So again, it's tricky.
Okay, fantastic. We're nearly getting to the end of the time, so there's a couple more issues. I might put them together again.
Yeah.
And one is you're probably going to say it's a professional conservation issue.
Yes.
Someone was asking about smoke-affected material. Is there much we can do? And even if the answer is to go to a conservator, is there something we should do in the meantime while we're waiting or looking for one? And then also a question about storing silkscreen prints in a folder. Is there a particular type of folder that would be recommended for silk screens?
Okay. So firstly, about smoke affected stuff, you can use this smoke sponge.
Yeah, and that is why it's called a smoke sponge or a soot sponge, is because it's primarily for removing smoke and soot, because something about the structure and what it's made of is really
It's kind
good
of
at,
got like an oily feel to it
yeah,
as well.
and you can sort of, I don't know if you can see, but there's lots of little, it's more like a sort of porous sponge you might use on your face or something. So that's really good for smoke affected areas. Again, you'd really want to have a good look at what your media type is and see how that will react to sort of that movement. So if it's something that is quite friable, I wouldn't go in with the media, but maybe surrounding areas. But then, you know, something that's quite stable, like, I don't know, like a gouache painting or something, where it's, you know, it's a very well applied layer, and it's not flaking or friable or anything, you could give that a go. But again, just the whole thing with any sort of dry cleaning you do at home is that you want to, you know, do one stripe and then look at your sponge and have a really good look and just be really attentive to if there's any color coming off. Stop immediately. Obviously, if you're removing smoke from a black area, that could be a little tricky, but you know, just sort of go around the area, and you know, if you are going to do any dry cleaning, we recommend doing a little test patch before sort of jumping into the whole item.
Yeah, and in a spot that's not very visible, so
Yeah.
not in the smack bang middle,
Yeah.
maybe on the edge.
Yeah, and if you have any turnover edges or, you know, something that's more for painting, I guess, but yeah.
And then silk
Silk
screen print.
screen prints,
So,
yes.
depends how big things are.
Yeah.
So
I think the most important thing with these, from that example as well, is just to really make sure everything is fully dry and fully cured before you try to store it or display it, because that sort of, like, you know, this person had done the artworks, they'd probably left them out for a while, but again,
the layers were just so thick, it needed, and it was oil-based print ink or whatever, paints. So, you know, oil takes a really long time to cure.
yeah, so I mean, if you do have any oil paints or oil pastels on paper, you just need to be aware that they take a lot longer to cure, because the chemical process of that setting is very different to a water-based
So it might be
media.
touch dry, but not properly cured.
Yeah.
But in terms of when it's dry, then best thing with paper is always to store flat. So flat in a box with interleaving kind of tissue paper in a flange roll. When it's too big, then you can roll it, but again, keep the roll really big, wide, and you want to roll it face out.
Yeah, but again, you know, a lot of the conservation suppliers do have sort of, you know, larger mylar
Boxes.
folders,
Yeah.
and there's also tissue there that you can sort of customize, you know, whatever sort of material you have. But again, it's that principle of not having it in direct contact with any sort of materials. That, so if you were putting it in a paper folder, maybe you'd want to use some tissue paper as well.
So yeah, key is just to keep things, particularly paper, because you want to see it flat, is to keep it flat. So try not to roll things unless you really have to. And I would say that I think there's a question about watercolor as well. So that's a similar thing. Keep it flat, keep it in folders if you can, or in a box.
Yeah, and again, like watercolor, it's kind of the opposite end from an oil-based silkscreen print, maybe. But again, just making sure that your media is dry
Yes.
before you try to store it.
And away from light
Yeah.
and so dark.
Yeah. And if you do have any media that is more like on the oil-based side of things, be aware that it can be sort of softened by, and the same with photographs, it can be softened if it's in a very humid or moist environment. So even if, you know, you've got something that has fully cured, it's fully dried, maybe if it gets introduced into that environment, it will sort of return to a softened state. And
particularly acrylic paints.
yeah,
That softens at room temperature, surprisingly.
yeah.
So yeah, so that's kind of like the key one that will stick as well. So,
Yeah, so I mean, and if you did want to, if you do have anything in these environments, it's best to move something into a cool, dark, dry space and maybe leave it for a week or something to sort of settle and re-acclimatize before going to do any sort of material on it.
cool.
Wow, there's so many things to know. Obviously, it's such a specialised area and you guys have trained all this time. So that's why we're going to have a second workshop. But just for everyone about those questions, Robyn and Elle have offered to respond as well by email, only if someone has a very particular question that's not covered by today, and they may be able to answer it or refer you onto another resource that can help. But have a look first through all the links and the materials that we're going to supply.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll pass on to Danny to say all the thank yous, and just a reminder that the workshop 2 is on the 28th of November, and that will be for slides and digital materials. But maybe we could do another one actually about how to make the boxes and the housing, because that sounds like that's something that would be a really good you know, next step after we've cleaned our stuff and we've had it sitting there. Then what do we do with it?
Yeah,
so,
we were going to do a 4-flap wrapper as a demo.
Yeah.
Thought it would take a bit too long, but it's
Yeah.
it's definitely something that's very simple to do with the, you know, the right material.
Yeah.
And
So we'll talk about that, and that might be in the new year, because there's 4 workshops in total. So it's not over yet. Don't worry, folks. So I'll hand you back to you. Thanks, Danny.
No, I just want to say we have a whopping 35 people online today for this presentation. I want to thank you so much, Care of Studios, Ellie and Robyn. That was a wonderful presentation. I love the way that you've just walked us through sort of the, you know, the sort of the practical side of it, and then given us a demonstration. I think I'll speak for everyone that we really appreciate your presentation today. Thank you once again to the City of Yarra for making this possible. Shout out to WAR. If you guys are not members of WAR, come join us. We'd love to have you. We're really, really looking forward to getting everybody back together at the next presentation. So, which I believe is going to be about Ellie and Robyn. The next presentation is we've focused on
slides and digital materials.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody. I know we've gone a little bit over time, but thank you so much. Have a lovely long weekend. Ciao.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And yeah, email us if you have any specific questions or anything.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.